All right. Hey, everyone. It's Dave and Casey coming to you with this security flash. There's obviously been a lot going on around the world over the past 72 hours. We wanted to talk about some of that, some of the implications for cyber defenders and the internet in general, and just, try to provide a balanced view in terms of what we're seeing and what we think is a good idea to be thinking about over the next period of time. So, Dave, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time. I think what you just said around taking a moment to reflect on this for me is really about building resiliency versus operating in a moment of panic or fear. As we look at the announcements that have come out, some of the warnings just recently from Department of Homeland Security or New York Department of Financial Services, they're really reminders more than they are a revelation. This is not new information. This is not something that we haven't seen before or we shouldn't be expecting all the time. But really, it's a moment for us to take a step back and think about the infrastructure that supports our nation from a critical infrastructure perspective, and as well as the infrastructure in each of our own organizations. We need to think about who are the third parties that we're partnered with.
Yeah.
What are those weaker points that you need to go hard in, right? Those vulnerabilities that you haven't yet mitigated or remediated, and making sure that you're thinking about having a succinct and up-to-date incident response plan. I know, Casey, you've been in a lot of these conversations, whether it's ISAC or some of the other critical infrastructure groups. I mean, what are you seeing out there and hearing from folks today?
Yeah, I mean, basically all of the ISACs, or the majority of them that are involved in critical infrastructure issued some sort of advisory, over the weekend. If they didn't get to it over the weekend, they released something this morning. And I think really that's a reflection of, kind of what you just said. Like none of it's new information in terms of like we need to be proactively thinking about how to lock this stuff down. But given the fact that like the conflict is escalating, like U.S. involvement in what's happening in Iran on a direct basis, and the potential for that to start to provoke direct responses onto U.S. infrastructure, like we have seen that before. And it's actually really interesting that the New York Financial Services regulatory body was a part of the announcement, just in terms of some of the DDoS attacks that we've seen out of this part of the world towards that infrastructure based on historical conflict. So it's, a lot of it's like, yep, okay, this is something that we've seen before. We can kind of expect these sorts of things going forward. I think specifically now, anyone who has like OT, ICS, SCADA, things that, are potentially targetable for the sake of like a retaliatory type thing, to be like just going out and rechecking. Check if you haven't
Yeah.
checked before, definitely. Recheck if you have. And then, the particular areas that are pretty commonly attacked out of the group of threat actors that would likely be involved, it's, default credentials, it's credential stuffing, it's like orphaned, publicly addressable infrastructure that's been forgotten about, fairly pedestrian stuff, but
Right.
things that do exist in these types of environments and are therefore, fairly easy to target if you decide you want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me back to the resiliency over fear,
Yeah.
right? And this is a reminder, none of this is new. As you said, like those are very foundational security best practices that we've all been talking about for well over a decade now. And yet, in situations like this, they keep coming up time and time again. I think one of the other things that we're going to see resurface, and we're already starting to see this play out
Hmm.
over the last few weeks, has been the risk of information operation around
Yeah.
both concealing information. So this is a bidirectional fear, right, or risk or concern that we
I think
have,
it's sort
which
of
is
omnidirectional at this
that's
point.
right. You're going to see that certain groups are going to want to conceal particular bits of information. Certain groups are going to want to amplify based on whatever serves the
Yep.
narrative or the position that they're taking. And then the new threat actor entering that is all of the AI generated misinformation, right? So historically, we've seen you repost out of context videos or you leverage video clips from previous conflicts or previous situations as new information.
Yeah.
But now we're actually seeing the ability of AI being able to, or folks using AI to generate concern and fear and start to push that out into people's eyes as they think about their social media feeds and other places. And it really comes back to again, pausing, not leaning into the fear, and
Yeah.
really starting to think about where are you getting your news information? Is this an up-to-date source? Is this a reliable and a reputable source? And how do you start kind of feeding that back? You've been around this space a long time, Casey. This isn't the first conflict we've seen this play out,
Yeah.
although AI is a bit of a new angle to it. How have you seen this play out in previous conflicts, and what are some of the kind of practical pieces, both from a traditional security side, but maybe from the misinformation side, that you'd advise people on?
Yeah, in terms of the information domain around this, it's yeah, you're right. Again, like we're in this sort of area where like none of it's kind of new. It's just moving a lot faster. I think now that AI assisted tooling for generating fairly credible misinformation and disinformation is
Yeah.
pretty easy to access. So, really what that suggests and what we've already started to see is kind of anyone who wants to can kind of jump in, and yeah, even down to like folks that want to increase their X follow account. Do you know what I mean? Like there is a vacuum. There's naturally a vacuum that happens around the kind of attacks that happened over the weekend in terms of credible intelligence. And once people recognize that there's a vacuum, they want to jump in and be the person that said the thing, and they can kind of generate that however they want. So yeah, the biggest piece of advice there is just watch what you're retweeting or sharing. Do you know what I mean? I think it's one thing around how you digest and process this information yourself. Like one of the challenges right now is that figuring out what a credible source is kind of difficult. Even if you do feel like you've got that figured out, just pausing before you retweet and actually amplify, something that might be misinformation or disinformation. There's obviously a lot of passion in all sorts of different directions around this as well. So just understanding that might be behind what's generated a piece of content, regardless of whether or not you align with it. Think of yourself as kind of a journalist in terms of how you're kind of spreading that message, and like, is it true or is it false? Because that really does matter. I think it's going to continue to matter more as this whole thing kind of goes along. Those would be the biggest things. And just understanding that, like, I think the motivations of folk, there's a whole range of them. You mentioned the whole idea of misdirection on the government side of things. Like we saw that literally the US doing that with sending the B-2 fleet west
Mhm.
rather, while they're actually attacking from the east. So that
That's
that is
right.
a thing the governments do at the like the national strategy level. But even further down from that, just like literally going out and sharing messages to generate a groundswell of support. Like that's something that we've seen a lot with the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. We've seen it in conflicts in the past, and this is going to be no exception to that on all sides. So yeah, I think just being aware of the fact that that's the environment that we're in, treating the opportunity that you have to share intelligence or to share pieces of information as like you actually taking your role as a fifth estate journalist in some ways, and not taking that too lightly in terms of how you share things around. And yeah, back to kind of what you said at the start, like don't panic. There is
Right.
definitely a lot going on, and there is definitely cause for concern that's legitimate. Panic rarely informs good responses, and I think doing everything you can to try to avoid that and actually being deliberate about that is probably a good thing too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to wrap this up. I think is we really take a step back. This is get back to the security fundamentals,
Yeah.
get back to using good judgment when it comes to social media, and understanding that what you're seeing is one side of the story, and there's going to be multiple points of view there,
Yep.
as well as again a lot of AI generated content that's floating out there. And then the last piece is getting back to resiliency, right? And thinking about defense in depth, thinking about how do you secure the infrastructure that operates your business, and who are the supply chain partners that you're working with, and how do you make sure in any degree that you possibly can that you are helping secure your supply chain in addition to just your own critical infrastructure.
Yep.
And this is again a great opportunity for everybody to take a breath and realize there is an increased threat environment that we're operating in, but it's not something that we haven't seen before, and it's not something that we won't see again. So this
Yep.
is an opportunity to harden those systems and try to get ahead of it.
Yeah, that would be the one call out in terms of actual action. It would be like get proactive about making sure you got the bases covered off. This
That's right.
idea of like default credentials being exploited, distributed denial of service, like website defacements, all those sorts of things. We can reasonably expect to see more of that over the next period of time. And if you're in a position where you're uncertain around your posture when it comes to that sort of thing at all, or if it's time to recheck, which, I would suggest if you're in critical infrastructure in particular, it probably is. Bug crowd's available to help out with that. And something that you should consider doing no matter how you get it done.
That's right. Great advice, Casey. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Dave.